Eva Hesse has been established now as a major artist of the 20th century, and there have been a whole series of major exhibitions of her work. I've written and thought and researched about Eva Hesse for a long time, and in each of these exhibitions and all the way through I've been aware of these small pieces, these little experimental works that she did. They've been shown in these exhibitions as peripheral objects, as minor elements within her oeuvre, a small number of them. But I've always been intrigued by what they are. They're very small, but they're big in the imagination. You know, they have this extraordinary visceral effect sometimes. It became clearer and clearer to me that they were not simply test pieces in the sense of being technical experiments, although some of them are clearly technical experiments, but if they are, they're pretty much always not only that. And so it became clearer that these small, very raw, often intractable, awkward objects tell us something about our encounter with art. As an art historian, you tend to kind of think you know what kind of object you're dealing with, a painting or a sculpture. And these objects, although in many ways being highly sculptural, they exist slightly beneath the threshold of sculpture. And so that sense of them throwing down a gauntlet and saying, "What do you make of me?" That, I think, is the challenge of them, what made me want to think about them. And to, well, I suppose it felt a little bit like a risk. What would it be to put all these small things together as almost a kind of collection in miniature of Hesse's work? And what would that tell us? What would that mean? Obviously, having said that, it therefore raises the problem of what we call them. Test pieces seem problematic to me. Test pieces has a kind of technological ring about it, doesn't it? And it fitted with, I think, the kind of language that artists were using in the 60s, artists that Hesse was close to. It smacks of the language of minimalism, a kind of language of industry. It seemed too technological when the materials that she was dealing with, that she was working with, were so tactile, so much of the hand rather than the machine. So we came up with this word, very simple, generic word, studiowork, which is to signal that these are works with a precarious status that exist in that kind of limbo between preparatory and finished work, between whole objects and part objects, between industrial and organic, so that they have this kind of limbo-like status. For the first time, we're showing a number of objects that have never been seen before. And one of the exciting things about installing the show is bringing these studio works together and discovering new links where pairs of things seem to kind of re-find each other. For instance, here we have one of these kind of baguette shapes from Berkeley Art Museum that we've brought together with one of the paper shapes from the estate, and it's clear that these two things were originally one single thing that's cut in two. So you get this sense of how she made things and how obviously these studio works have become dispersed and separated, but some of these objects are kind of coming home, and we can really understand a great deal about how she worked, how she made things, by seeing them in this new context. These, for many, many years, were simply in a box in the estate. So I think that sense that people in the past didn't know what to make of them, here we bring them out for the first time, and what can we make of them? Some of them are incredibly fragile and ephemeral. This bowl shape is made out of tissue paper that's been molded over a curved surface. You can actually see the writing here. This is the writing on the end of an industrial roll of tissue paper here. You can see some of her pencil markings here. And these marks, which could be seen as a kind of three-dimensional drawing, are in fact the creases caused by this being molded against a curved surface. On the other side, you can see her having drawn out circles. Which way up? Which way up this is meant to go? Even that is uncertain. So that sense of these being indeterminate, the indeterminate status of these objects is something that I think is important to stress, but also the relationships between them. Hesse is working with a wide range of materials, from latex through fiberglass, through papier-mâché, through wax, through aluminium mesh, a whole variety of different kinds of materials. Many of them, I think, interesting her because of their tactility, because of their visceral quality. She's interested in latex, which she first starts working with in 1967. Part of what she's interested in, I think, is the ephemerality of that material. She does know that it changes over time. It changes colour. It turns from a rather lovely pale yellow. Over time, it turns a sort of amber orange, and you can see the difference in photographs taken from the 70s, for example, and the condition of these works now. One of the things that we wanted to do in the exhibition was to try to recreate some of the informality of these studio works. There's a photograph that Mel Bochner took. Mel Bochner was an artist and a friend of Hesse. He took a photograph of a low table in Hesse's apartment, strewn with all sorts of different objects, but including some of these little so-called test pieces. And there is a sense in which they were placed around her studio in this offhand way. And I think tell us something about her working process. Those kinds of informal arrangements recur then in some of her major pieces. Repetition 19.3, for instance, the way she distributes things on the floor can be related to the way in which those elements are quite, well, apparently randomly strewn across that low table. So the relationship between plan and accident, order and irregularity, is something very central to Hesse's working method, but I think comes through in the way in which she arranges objects. One of the striking things about the studio works is the way in which Hesse herself showed them during her life. So when she has her first major sculptural solo show at the Fruitmarket Gallery in 1968, in the back room there's a shelf on which she places some of these studio works, and then a glass pastry case filled with some of these little objects. And what's striking there, I think, is the way in which she, for whatever reason, chooses to make public something that in many ways is the organic life of the studio. There's one large-scale work, which is related to her work Contingent. Contingent is a work made up of 8 panels that's now in Canberra in Australia. This panel, which we're showing here, is made of cheesecloth, fiberglass and latex. It was already during Hesse's lifetime conceived of by her, she writes about this in her notes, as a separate piece, as a panel that's separate from the others. The state that it exists in now is very different, however, from what it must have been like then. And we have a photograph of the work in the studio in black and white that can give you some sense of what it might have been then. Now, it's an extremely fragile piece. You can see the way in which the latex that would have been pliable and a creamy yellow has turned a dark amber. But still you get the sense of the differing opacities. Some sections of it you can see through more than the others, and you can see the way in which she's working with these combinations of materials. One of the most influential aspects, I think, of Hesse's work is the way in which she configures the work in relation to the body or the bodily in radically new and innovative ways. In some ways she inherits a language of minimalism and she redefines it in relation to something corporeal and visceral and of the gut. And that's been of huge significance for subsequent artists. And what I think is interesting in the studio work, as well as the rest of her work, obviously, is the way in which she does that, often abstractly. You can see the way in which she evokes pairs of things, which may be breast-like, but it won't only be breast-like. It may also suggest something about the tactility or the bodily nature of vision itself. And that comes through so powerfully in the studio works on show here. I think it's important to stress that Hesse's career as an artist is really incredibly short. There's 10 years of work. She dies tragically young at the age of 34 in 1970. The exhibition really draws on work from 1965 through to 1970, the year she died. This is the period when she's making the most innovative and radical changes in how to make sculpture. And there's an incredible volatility, an incredible intensity, and a high level of risk-taking. This is about the future. This is about how sculpture could change. It's all about experiment. It's all about opening up new possibilities. And in a way, yes, some of them do now look slightly like relics or cast-offs, but that's nothing to do with the biography of Hesse. That's because one of the main dynamics in the work that's so interesting is between things that look as if they're coming into being. They look as if they literally are the origin of things, but at the same time, they look as if they're remaindered or left over in some way. And it's that kind of double-sidedness almost of the work that I think comes through so strongly in this exhibition, or I hope it does.